Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope you can all hear me properly and online as well. Good. Okay. So, as mentioned, I'm Jurgi Giraud. I'm a first-year PhD student at the Open University in the School of Languages and Applied Linguistics. And today I will give you a brief overview of my PhD project, which is about translating bioinformatics. So first of all, I'd like to preface this talk by saying that it's my first time presenting at a conference ever. So it's a bit intimidating, but I'm very happy to be here. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. So my project is being supervised by my lovely supervisors who are on screen here, Dr. Andrew Gargett, who's my lead supervisor, Dr. Wendy Bacon, Dr. Jerome Deveau, and Professor Martin Weller. And is being funded by the Open Oxford Cambridge HRC Doctoral Training Partnership, and is in collaboration with the EBI, the European Bioinformatics Institute. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what I've done so far in my first year and what's to come and the next steps in my project, and give you some key definitions on very central aspects of this PhD project. So to begin with, I'd like to give you brief overview of my background. So I was born and raised in France, but then I moved to the UK to pursue my university education, where I received a bachelor's degree in English language and linguistics and modern languages, and also did a master's degree in translation studies and applied linguistics. I also worked as a scientific translator, specializing in the life sciences for nearly 3 years, and that really is the motivation as to why I decided to embark on this PhD journey that I started in October last year. So some key definitions of some very central concepts for this project. So I'm sure you're all aware of what machine translation is, or known also in other languages as automated translation. I'm sure maybe many of you have used machine translation maybe during your stay here in Lyon, if you're not a speaker of French. But as a quick reminder, machine translation, or MT, is the automated translation of text or speech from one language to another using computational methods. Quite central to machine translation research and development is the notion of corpus, which is a large collection of written or spoken text, often used for linguistic analysis or training language models, very topical at the minute, and machine translation systems. And related to the notion of corpus is that of corpus linguistics, which is the study of language patterns and usage by analyzing corpora using also computational techniques. So, a few questions already that may arise from what I've presented so far. First of all, why scientific translations? And I think it's always been important to translate science throughout the centuries, but I think what happened recently, a couple of years ago now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, truly highlighted the need for more global collaboration in science and to erase borders, at least linguistically speaking. So scientific translation can enhance access to knowledge, promotes inclusivity and diversity, enables scientists to access multilingual resources, facilitates scientific collaboration, as I mentioned, but also fosters scientific literacy. So very, very important concepts that also was highlighted by Alex's presentation. And so to recapitulate, why scientific translation? A need for more global collaboration in science. Translation is also about accessibility, and translation is a needed process for removing barriers and promoting engagement across languages while creating a more open science. So here are two publications that I found to be very interesting, and if you're interested in the subject, I would highly recommend that you read those. The first one came out very recently, is very, very interesting. It's called A Manifold Course for Being a Non-Native English Speaker in Science. And as myself, a non-native English speaker, I can truly relate to this. So this publication talks about the experience of non-English speakers, of scientists who are non-English native speakers. It's in the environmental science, but I think we can all relate to that as well. Their struggles and the challenges they face in the community, ranging from presentations, so giving presentations in English, to accessing resources, multilingual resources. The second one, by Steigerwald and al., Overcoming Language Barriers in Academia, Machine Translation Tools and a Vision for a Multilingual Future, deals with the use of machine translation and the importance to translate scientific text and how machine translation can facilitate that, and also all the challenges that may arise from this. So if you're interested, I really recommend those publications, especially the first one that came out very recently. So, another questions. Why bioinformatics? So again, I think bioinformatics has become a very much indispensable tool within the life sciences, and that's a trend we're seeing for the last decade or more. But I think it was also truly highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But as many other scientific fields, it is unfortunately English dominated. And we just mentioned that we need more collaboration in science. So that implies having more multilingual resources available to scientists and domain experts. Additionally, the EBI, so the European Bioinformatics Institute, and the ISCB, the International Society for Computational Biology, have flagged resource translation as a key priority. Additionally, we have evidence of projects done in bioinformatics, such as the Cabana project. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Cabana project. So it's a capacity strengthening project, also a capacity building project for bioinformatics in Latin America, dealing with, Latin American bioinformaticians, who might also be speakers of Spanish. And translation is also very central to that project, enabling scientists in Latin America to access resources in their language. Additionally, I'd like to mention a project that has been done by one of my colleagues at the university, at the Open University, Stefana Deptrat, and my supervisor, Dr. Wendy Bacon, called Spanscriptomics, which was an online event organized by the Open University and by the Galaxy Training Network, targeted at native Spanish speakers. So this project was really, to get some feedback from bioinformaticians, Spanish-speaking bioinformaticians, in order to get the sense of how they interact with translated resources. We're actually looking to publish some data that we've gathered through there, both qualitative and quantitative data. The qualitative data is very interesting. Some feedback we got from both the translators involved in the project, but also the domain experts involved in the project. So, another questions, why bioinformatics in French? I believe there's actually a parallel session running with this one about bioinformatics in France. So there is a strong and large French-speaking bioinformatic community. I have some analytics that were provided to me through the EBI. So bear in mind, this is not just the only account of French-speaking bioinformaticians we have, but through the EBI, we have 6,800 French-speaking users across a large variety of countries in Europe, France, Switzerland, and Belgium, but also in North Africa, in the Maghreb region, especially in Algeria and Morocco, but also in North America, in Canada. There's also evidence of institutions and organizations in French-speaking countries, such as the Institut Français de Bioinformatique, the IFB, the Société Française de Bioinformatique, the SFBI, who is a sponsor of this conference, and the Institut Suisse de Bioinformatique, the ISB, in Switzerland as well. I mentioned machine translation, and machine translation research and development is what we say very much data hungry. So it requires a lot of data. Data is at the core of the development of machine translation, and machine translation can really facilitate and accelerate knowledge exchange, especially when applied to scientific fields, especially in the life sciences. So it requires data in the forms of linguistic data, such as parallel corpora, monolingual corpora. I will give you a quick explanation of what those are, as well as dictionaries and glossaries and evaluation datasets. And this data, especially in domain data, is very much needed. And by domain, I mean that in linguistics and machine translation, research and developments, domain refers to a specific subject area or field of expertise with its unique terminology, phraseology, or language conventions. So first year of my PhD, so I had to do a thorough and comprehensive literature review. At least that's what we have to do in linguistics. I found no evidence of machine translation systems trained on bioinformatics data, no evidence of centralized terminology or phraseology databases, or any type of translation tools for the translation of bioinformatics resources. And human translation would be far too time-consuming and too costly to be a feasible option. We have to understand that there are so many resources and materials being created and generated almost on a daily basis in the life sciences. It would be impossible for human translators to keep up, and it would be far too costly anyway. There is, however, evidence of machine translation system being trained on neighboring domains, such as the biomedical domain on biomedical data, and that's pretty relevant. So here's the main research question that underlines my research project, which is how can machine translation technology be designed to support domain experts in translating bioinformatics? And from this main overarching question, there are three questions that stem from it, such as what are the linguistic features and patterns found in a domain-specific discourse of bioinformatics in English and French? How can machine translation technology be domain adapted to support translation in bioinformatics? How can domain adapted MT technology be evaluated? So the main objectives would then be to compile two types of corpora, and I'll give you a quick overview of what those are. To perform a corpus-based analysis and annotation of linguistic phenomena, to domain adapt machine translation systems using this corpora and data, and to evaluate these MT systems, which is a very important step. So the two types of corpora that I'll be compiling that I've already started to compile for this project, I mentioned comparable monolingual corpora and parallel corpora. So I'll start with a parallel corpus. So a parallel corpus is basically a text in a source language paired with its translation in a target language. So for instance, if we take bioinformatics, it's a text in bioinformatics paired with its direct translation into another language. So for instance, English and French. So if we bring it down to the level of a sentence, we have a sentence in English paired with a sentence in French, but it's direct translation. On the other hand, a comparable monolingual corpus is a monolingual corpus. So we gather data in a specific language, for instance, English, that is representative of a domain, so bioinformatics. And we do the same in French, but they're not translation of one another. I hope that clears the difference between the two. Parallel corpus, it's very important when it comes to machine translation development, and the comparable monolingual corpora, very interesting when it comes to linguistic analysis, but both work in tandem pretty well and very useful together. So, as I mentioned, I've already started to compile this parallel corpus, which I've decided to name BioPar. It's good practice in the field to name your corpora, and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so BioPar stands for Bioinformatics Parallel. So there was a problem. It's to find parallel data for bioinformatics in English and French, because they have to already exist out there, which is very difficult to, because bioinformatics is what we would consider to be a low resource domain. There aren't many data available. I found one source of parallel data that exists out there, of linguistic parallel data, and to use abstracts from publications and scholarly works. So it's sometimes we can find that abstracts are translated from English into another language, and that's a very good source of parallel data. So I've scoped data sets and databases that you might be familiar with, such as PubMed or Scopus, looking for publications that contain parallel abstracts, abstracts in both English and French, and then extracting those abstracts using automation, especially through Python. And then these are used to compile this corpus, and then we have more post-processing that needs to be applied and done to the data, such as sentence document alignment, sentence boundary detection, and cleansing, of course, removing any potential non-matching pairs, or if an abstract doesn't have a translation, they need to be removed as well. So to recapitulate, this is a parallel corpus comprised of English, French research article abstracts and scholarly publication abstracts. So far, I've been able to compile a bit more than 1 million words worth of parallel data. That seems like a lot, but it's actually not a lot when it comes to corpus building for parallel corpora. And I'm still midway through the data collection, so I'm expecting to collect more data and to find more publishers as well when I can collect the data from. Then for the comparable monolingual corpora, I will have a similar approach. I will be scoping for data on those similar data sets and databases such as PubMed and Scopus, but this time I will also be looking at training materials, because this time I'm able to access them in the monolingual form. I was not able to access translated training materials, unfortunately. So we'll also be using the Galaxy Training Network and also working with French institutes in bioinformatics. So using a similar data extraction automation, and then compiling both BioEON, the monolingual corpus in English containing bioinformatics research articles and training materials, and then the BioFR, which is the French bioinformatics research articles and training material corpus. And then once I have all of these lovely corpora compiled, and hopefully very large, this is when I will be performing a corpus-based analysis. This is very much the linguistic part of it, and I hope I'm not going to bore you with that. But I will be using both ready-made, already built corpus linguistic tools, such as Unconc and Lunchbox, but as well DIY tools using Python natural language processing. to perform linguistic analysis. I'm especially looking at phraseology, and phraseology is the study and usage of fixed expressions, formulaic language, and recurrent patterns in language to extract certain type of phraseological units, also called PUs, such as collocations and lexical bundles, but also looking at specialized terminology, which is very important when we talk about scientific domains. And all of this data and annotated data will be used to create this phraseolexical database or glossary. Then following this will come a very important step, which is in-domain machine translation adaptation. So taking all the data that was collected prior to this, so the parallel corpus, the two monolingual corpora, but also the phraseolexical database or glossary, using this to train a machine translation system or multiple machine translation systems. I don't think we will be able to build a system from scratch. This is very much time consuming and resource consuming. And within this project, I don't think it will be feasible. But we can use machine translation systems that were trained already on different sets of data, especially the biomedical domain, as I mentioned, and then apply this new data that we have to fine tune or in-domain adapt this machine translation system. So now that we have a machine translation or more, for comparison, especially in terms of performance, trained on bioinformatics data, will come a very, very important step, which is evaluation. And evaluation will be comprised of two phases, one being with what we call automated metrics that don't really involve humans, but I really want to involve domain experts in the evaluation process. So having both professional translators and bioinformaticians, French-speaking bioinformaticians, analyzing the performance, the quality of the machine translation outputs, and get a sense how they interact with the translated materials. That's very, very important to me. That's also relates to my background in translation studies, where the end users needs to be included in the evaluation process. We can't just have automation. And that's the list of references, and that's it. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. If you have any questions, I welcome them. If you have any more questions or feedback, here's my email address. You can also scan this QR code to take me, it will take you to my research profile. So thank you very much.
Hello? Yes. Questions? Francis put his hand up.
So it's very interesting. And I just want to, timing is everything. So I just, at the coffee break today, I was talking with the folks at Giga Science.
Okay.
And they have one of their newer journal, which is Gigabit or Gigabyte, I guess. Byte. It's Byte, yeah. Is able to publish multiple translation of an article, and at the press of a button, and so they were showing me an example where they had English, Ukrainian, and German, I think, or something like that. And so they don't have any French articles yet, I asked, but they will be. And they said that the NLM, so the National Library of Medicine, would actually take all versions of the article in PubMed Central. So once the product is finished, there will be a receptacle and they will all be joined together and point to the same PubMed ID and so forth. And so it will be very sort of, it's not what you're talking about, but it's an end product. And it would facilitate, I'm from Quebec, and I can see that in Quebec, there would be, so scientists publish in English but there's governments is encouraging you to publish in French, but bioinformatics people will say, no, well, I'm not gonna shoot myself in the foot and publish in French. But if they can do both, then that might work. That will work, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm not too familiar with what they do and the type of systems they use. Of course, the problematic of data, what type of data are you using? Is it sort of cross multi-domain system? Well, the system they're using to translate.
I actually don't know, but they're here at the conference,
sure.
So you should definitely talk to them. They're at the OUP booth.
Sure, okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll have a chat with them. Thank you.
Next question.
Hi. To expand the corpus of data that you have you considered textbooks? Because I'm sure there must be bioinformatics textbooks in both English and French, Wikipedia articles on bioinformatics,
That's
that
actually,
kind of source.
So that's actually a very good idea. For textbooks, we have to be aware of potential copyright or issues. So I'm only using open access publications. I don't want to, use data that is copyrighted. But Wikipedia articles has been done in the past, actually using Wikipedia articles for building corpora for machine translation. I'm looking into it. There's also something called data augmentation that can be done to use perhaps any synthetic data generated. I'm open to ideas to have more data for this parallel corpus.
And I think some funding agencies require, at least in Switzerland, an abstract in both English and French. So,
Yes,
yeah.
It's very useful.
Also, suggestion for the parallel data institutional universities repositories, because
Yes.
at least in my country, I had to publish both an abstract in Italian and an abstract in English. But a warning, this might be slightly biased because I included much more data in the Italian abstract because that was the only version of Italian text. Like that was the only place where I could include the information in Italian, right?
I see.
So, and in general, which is linked to a question, how can we check the bias in that kind of data? I mean, it's for sure bias, right? Because only certain type of researcher or in some type of context translate their research.
Yes. So first of all, for you, the first part of your question or comment, I'm using French datasets, scholarly works, so theses published by students. And also in France, it's quite common also to have abstracts translated. Through the post-processing steps, any non-matching sentences will be removed. So if there's more data in the French part, the unmatched data will be removed, so it's still very useful. For the second one, data is always biased. When we talk about human-generated data anyway, it's a big problem when you're talking about large language models as well, ChatGPT and the likes, and machine translation. So to bias for these, first of all, it's very unlikely that we'll have more than, we'll have the same authors again and again, especially for thesis works. I don't think people will be submitting the same thesis. So we have a large variety of translators or self-translating people who translate their work. And in this post-processing step, we'll be looking at potential biases, removing any information that will be sensitive, etc. So it will be done post-processing.
Firstly, just to say that was excellent presentation, especially for a first time. Very good. And your work is very exciting for me because I think it will be able to help my work to refine what I'm doing and just improve it so much. So some of the things I've been working on recently was we translated, I work on the sickle cell disease ontology. I'm the curator and developer for that. And we created a workflow for translating the labels and definitions of all of the terms into French from English. And our process used, we extracted everything we wanted and then ran it through Babylon, which is the auto translation.
Yes.
And then sent that to French or people in our field, like some of our colleagues who are English and French speaking. And they then use that to help us come up with, finalized. And so we have manually, reviewed terminology. And we've also done it, we will also be doing translation into French layperson. So we've done for the SCDO now from English technical to English layperson. And we're also going to be doing our French technical into French layperson, because we're going to be using that in mHealth apps and things like that. So obviously, yes, it takes a long time to have those things reviewed, and if we don't have to go through that process, that would help a lot. But perhaps I'm not sure. You can maybe have a look and see if it might be useful for you in your at the end when you're wanting to. When you're wanting to validate yours, you might want to look at ours and see if there are any terms that are overlapping that to use it to validate as well, because ours has been manually reviewed.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a good idea, actually. I'm open to those ideas as well, and obviously interacting with people who've done this. So if you're able to give me perhaps your contact details. And
yeah, I'll talk to you afterwards. Also, just to say, so we've made our workflow freely available to anyone. So already the disease ontology is going to be translating the whole disease ontology into French. And now I think this is like a snowball effect, and I think other ontologies are going to be translating and maybe using our workflow or another, but it will be they will be happening, it will be happening a lot more. And so having big ontologies in this field being translated already will also help.
Sure, yeah.
Also, great job on your presentation. You mentioned bioinformatics in French and bioinformatics in Spanish.
Yes.
Can you talk about, is there anything being done for translation in Spanish? And Spanish-speaking countries have less resources for doing bioinformatics, so there's less publications in having abstracts in Spanish for starters. So what kind of resources do you think would be helpful for that kind of translation?
So I'm not actually myself working with Spanish. The examples I've given is that through the Cabana project, they have identified translations. And if you're familiar with the Galaxy training network, there are actually already some tutorials on there that have been created and translated by humans, but only a couple of them because, again, it's very time consuming. So obviously there's a need for more languages, and I'm starting with French because unfortunately, I would love to be able to address all languages possible, but we're time limited and resource limited as well. So I'm working with French, but the good thing is that I'm trying to build a system that would allow more languages to be added on top as well. And the workflow, the throughput that I'm using to extract data can be used for all the languages, Spanish, French, German, or low resource languages with perhaps less data available to them. So yes, I think in the future we'll be able to implement more languages. And obviously there is a need for bioinformatics in Spanish with Siniestro de Cabana project, but also this other project that's been done with the Open University as well. So I would love to include Spanish as well.
One last question.
Yeah, so I know like a lot of countries and cultures, like it's very common to learn English as a second language very early from an age. I think of like the Netherlands or something where like Dutch and English are taught almost simultaneously.
Yes.
I would think like in those languages, there should be like a less emphasis on translating into those languages. Are there languages that we feel like need that maybe that's not as strong, like that emphasis where English is taught like in correspondence with a native language? Is there languages that maybe need translation more than say Dutch or something?
I see. That's a very interesting question, actually. I think that we always have scientists who will prefer maybe to use English to communicate or to learn, but it's to give them at least the option to have English or have access to their native language as well, or to any other languages for that matter. Again, my background working with French, I don't think I truly have an answer to this. There might be languages in other parts of the world, especially in Asia, where there is a strong emphasis of using machine translation. I'm talking about India as well. They have a large variety of languages and dialects there. Maybe China as well, large variety of languages and languages spoken there. So in Europe, again, English has been taught for a very long time, and lingua franca is English in science, but it's not like this throughout the world, and even in Latin America as well. We might benefit from having those resources translated and emphasis laying there. But I don't really have a clear list of languages that might be a priority right now. But yeah.